Welcome back to the latest edition of The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Bruce Feldman, joined by my colleague from The Athletic, Stuart Mandel. We don't have Ralph Russo today, but he will be back in the next episode, so you'll see his happy, optimistic face shortly. Stu, we were going to get into the mailbag in a little bit. We're also going to get into the story Antonio Morales and I did this week for The Athletic on our coaches survey, really related to the last coaching carousel cycle. But before we get that, you did a story on Tuesday, I guess it is, about the CSC. And I don't know how many of our listeners know exactly what that is, because I feel like we talked about it and then it kind of went under the radar. But it relates to the transfer portal, and it relates to kind of the accounting space of this kind of nebulous, dubious little side space of college football. So what did you find out?
Yeah, there's some news in that space on Tuesday. What I'm going to do is mention the most digestible part first and then work backwards to explain it. So it was actually one of our friends, Ross Dellinger, who reported later Tuesday after our story came out that Nebraska is the first school we know of, heard of, where a large number of players, 18, had their NIL deals rejected by CSC. And now they're going to fight. They've hired a law firm and now they're going to fight that. Okay, what is CSC? College Sports Commission. This was the organization established by the Power Four conferences, not the NCAA, after the House settlement to enforce the House settlement. The rev share part of House settlement is pretty clear cut, right? Schools can make deals with their players. Those don't have to be approved by anybody. The outside deals, which we know, which we primarily think of as collectives, right? But there's some other parts of that, have to go through this clearinghouse where, in theory, every deal above $600, Bruce, has to be approved. As we know, in college football, the numbers often go well beyond that. So this portal cycle was kind of the first test of this system where, we see the headlines, we hear the rumors, right? Guys are getting $2, $3, $4, and some quarterbacks up to $6 million. Teams are spending $40 million on their roster. Clearly, nobody is abiding by any of this. So on Tuesday morning, Brian Seeley, the CEO of the College Sports Commission, held, I think it might have been his first ever media call, or first one in a long time, to give us a little status update, if you will. And he was pretty candid, and it was, I would say, a tad bit alarming. He basically said that they had way more, and this is going to sound really naive, but way more what's called associated entities deals than they were expecting, and that their system is kind of overwhelmed by it. What's an associated entity? The most common one you hear, Bruce, is collectives. But these schools from day one, right, have been coming up with all these creative ways to work around the salary cap. And a big one was, and in their mind, a legitimate one, is you get a Learfield or a Playfly, one of these companies that does sponsorship deals, to get sponsorship deals for your athletes instead of for the school. But what they were doing in some cases, and apparently this is what was happening in Nebraska, they say, okay, transfer portal guy, we're going to pay you, come to our school, we're going to pay you $2 million. $1 million's going to be in rev share. The other $1 million, we don't really have that lined up yet, but trust us, Learfield will get you a bunch of deals. And apparently that's not how it's supposed to work, and that's not in CSC's mind within the rules, and so they rejected those guys' deals, and you can see where this is headed.
Not surprised at all that people inside college football, especially college athletics, are getting creative to find workarounds to make some of these things happen. I mean, we could all have predicted this. The fact that Brian Seeley and the people who brought him in thought it was going to go a certain way and realize it's not. I mean, that's totally naive. And good luck to them, because that's like, that horse is so far out of the barn, you can't even see it or smell it, right? So I do want to tack on one thing. So I know we referenced this a week or so ago. You had an interesting item in your mailbag, like maybe a week ago, about somebody had asked about what 10 commandments would you come up with to help make college football better. this kind of ties into a little bit of our coaches survey that Antonio Morales and I did. But this one particular question really wasn't in it. It was while I was talking to somebody who is a personnel director at a Power 4 conference program. And I'm going to read it to you about like one thing that he would be in favor of that he thought would make college football better. And this is what he said. I would be in favor of transparency. Everyone has to turn over what they pay their guys. Every other sport does it. You can see what Jokic makes. You can see what Myles Garrett makes. Now an agent can't tell me what Oklahoma can't tell me what is paying some guy. I could actually look it up. It'll be very revealing to see who is operating above board and who isn't. And if you're not in favor of transparency, then why? The marketplace is dictated by the agents, the parents, and the players, and we don't have a way to fact check it. It could hold a fire. It could hold the feet to the fire of these agents who are trying to extort money. He told me they're trying to reset the market at every chance they get. I think he's right. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point because I think people will still try to get creative and working around. But as you know, you and I have talked about this a ton offline, especially in some on the show, is I know you're always fascinated by, we got to get the numbers. And the numbers are rarely going to be accurate, right? Because they're either coming from an agent who wants to put out bogus numbers. So once they're reported somewhere, then all of a sudden that gets spiraled around. But I think this is a big problem, and I don't see how they clean it up, because they can clean it up in pro sports because, there are certain parameters set in place that college sports right now, because they're not employees, because these contracts aren't really the contracts per se, that it ends up in this gray area.
He's 100% right, but so far, it's going in the opposite direction, to the point where there are schools who are trying to schools are trying to get their states to specifically exempt these records from open records requests. I know our colleague Matt Baker, FOIA Wiz, has tried to get all of these numbers, and the schools just don't provide them. They'll say those are, student privacy, so on and so forth. Now, in theory, CSC has all this data now, right? All these deals that have been submitted, like
if they've been submitted, right?
That's
a big if.
People are avoiding that. But if nothing else, they could put together a big database and say, all right, in the most recent portal cycle, quarterbacks got this, running backs got this, wide receivers got this, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that will happen. But again, like the whole system from day one last summer when this first started coming out, we were all just like, really? You guys really think this is going to work? You really think you can like put the toothpaste back in the, wait, what's the phrase?
Toothpaste back in the tube.
Toothpaste back in the tube. Here's a quote, Bruce, that's going to blow your mind. So I kind of feel bad for Brian Seeley. He didn't design this system, but he's been tasked with running it. And you can tell he's like reading between the lines. What did I get myself into? What I've been told was there is a belief among many that perhaps up to 90% of deals flowing through the system, 90% of deals flowing through the system would do so automatically. They would not need any kind of human review. And in other words, they thought 90% of these deals would just be normal, legitimate brand deals. And they would put it in the database and say, yep, this is valid. You're good. Unfortunately, they found that like 2/3 of the deals so far are not that. They're collective deals. They're MMR deals, like the Learfield stuff.
Did they talk to anybody who was actually working in college football before they came? Like, it's just it's beyond naive, somewhere between naive and just really dense and dim. Like, I
agree. But if you remember, I remember doing a story last summer talking to some ADs who, whether it's Ross Bjork, I remember Mark Harlan at Utah, you had people out there publicly, Mike Babinski at Purdue saying, yep, this is going to solve everything. This is going to be the end of pay for play. We're going to have a hard cap and everybody's going to abide by it. The only way this system was ever going to work is if the schools made an earnest attempt to follow the rules. And maybe you'd have some outliers and you'd catch some cheaters. Nobody from day one, nobody at all is following the rules. They're all finding creative ways to get around it because 20.5 million, it's enough for most schools. It's not enough for Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Alabama.
And then it's not going to be enough for
ones.
most schools then, because then all of a sudden you've blown through it. I mean, I had this conversation earlier this month with a head coach at a Power 4 conference school. It's a program that should be a playoff team from time to time. And he was just talking about how they are millions and millions away from some of the top programs in the league he's in. Right. And the money they're paying is quite a bit, but it is not close to like at least 4 schools in this one particular Power 4 conference. So I just kind of come back to like, this is a big reality that they're dealing with. And again, I think some of this stuff our listeners already know, but it's like you added this layer. You already had middlemen in the old version of this and, whatnot, but now you've added all these agents. A lot of them are new to this. They're new to this business. Some of them might've been agents. Some of them might've been runners for agents. And now all of a sudden, again, they're charging 20, 30%. I mean, we've heard some outlandish numbers and outlandish explanations from some of these guys and some of these people. And it's hard. Now they're in the system. Now they're in the process. And, good luck to Brian Seeley to clean up some of that, because I don't know how you're policing those folks.
Brian Seeley almost seemed like he was throwing up a white flag. By the way, I should also mention there's this thing called a participation agreement that they need every Power 4 school to sign that basically says we agree to the enforcement of these rules. And they don't have it yet. There are holdouts. They are fighting the terms. Anyway, to bring it back to Nebraska real quick, I don't know too many details about it yet, but you can see where this is headed. So in the CSC, the athletes themselves cannot sue because they're part of the house settlement. But what they can do is if their deal gets rejected, they can ask for arbitration, and that's what they're doing. If the arbitration guy or woman sides with CSC and says you got to give your money back, the state attorney general or somebody like that is going to take CSC to court, and that's going to be the end of CSC. Because to me, it was always a house of cards to say we're going to tell these athletes that they can't make what somebody's willing to offer them. All right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we will talk about the coaching survey. All right, Bruce, you and Antonio interviewed a whole lot of coaches anonymously to get their opinions on the people who were hired in this most recent coaching carousel. And nobody made more waves in the cycle than Lane Kiffin. So you guys asked nearly 30 coaches a simple question. Will Kiffin win a national championship at LSU? What was the split?
I would say the majority feel like, yes, he will win a national title at LSU. And a lot of it comes back to the resources at the program, how much they're committed. You saw that just in a small sample size of how much they ramped up to get him to, 3 guys in the top 5 in our rankings that were in the portal. I think that was a big show of like, okay, they're really committed. If you want to believe Brian Kelly, the former LSU coach or whatnot, I know he did a radio interview like last week and talked about how they're going to be north of $40 million in terms of their roster payroll. And this is coming after last year when he was there last year as the head coach at LSU, they had tripled their budget on players. Again, we've said this ad nauseum. 3 coaches before Brian Kelly all won national titles at LSU. I mean, that is a rare detail that, for a program, and the commitment. It's got great facilities. Lane Kiffin got good players at Ole Miss, especially really, really good players at certain positions. He can get better players, especially in the trenches in Baton Rouge. So a lot of folks inside the coaching world said yes. A bunch of them, though, also said, you know what? Lane has a habit of having a hard time getting out of his own way and often getting in his own way. And that can be an issue for players. It can be an issue for other coaches on staff, how to deal with it, right? And there was Antonio and I in the story of this, I think this is a significant detail to come up with, which is, for all the credit Lane gets as a creative offensive mind, and he's not the play caller right now, Charlie Weiss Jr. is, but he gets a lot of credit for that. Keep in mind, there's, we see that under the umbrella of coaching, but also he has had this, and it's happened more than once, where it's like when he has expectations, his teams have underperformed. You go way back to when he was at USC, their preseason number one, they got a lot of experience. They don't even finish in the top 25. And then you go back to his Ole Miss team 2 years ago. He has Jackson Dart, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, an elite D-line led by Walter Nolan, a first-round talent, lots of players there. They should make the playoff. They lose to a terrible Kentucky team and a really mediocre Florida team and end up costing themselves a playoff spot. So I think, there's some of that too that factors into the, is Lane at times get in his own way as a coach? Does it affect his team? Do they underperform at times? I mean, look, that team he bailed on ended up playing really well without him in the playoff. They almost made the national title game without him, right? And so there's certainly that. The other thing that shined through, and a couple people were like, when I asked that question, multiple head coaches said, God, I hope not. And then they proceeded to answer what they said, either because they don't like Lane Kiffin because of his personality, or they really don't like Lane Kiffin because of what he did bailing on that team right before the playoff. I know one coach, another head coach, who had said, I was rooting for Ole Miss because of Lane Kiffin bailed on them.
I think he's a really good coach. I do. And I think he is probably one of the best there is at the transfer portal. He showed that with this most recent class. But if the bar is national championship, I mean, it's really hard to win a national championship, and there's sometimes just luck and randomness involved. And so, and a great example is Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning does a great job acquiring talent, developing talent. They've I believe the only teams they've lost to in the last 3 years were teams that reached the national championship game. But they themselves have gotten blown out twice in the playoff, and they haven't gotten there, right? Does that mean he's not a great coach? Of course, he's a great coach.
I think you got to get to your definition. You and I quibble on this a little bit about the word great.
Great.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is if Dan Lanning left for another job tomorrow, wouldn't we say he did a very good job there? Like nothing wrong with that.
No doubt.
So if Lane Kiffin has the equivalent of Dan Lanning's run and does one of his typical burn every bridge on the way out of town, would we say he was a failure because he didn't win the national championship?
At LSU, probably. I mean, it's hard, but we're going to say Brian Kelly was a failure at LSU, right? Now, Brian Kelly didn't make the playoff.
But he was also going 8-4 by the end. He didn't make the playoff.
I will say this, Stu, and I don't know if you agree with me. I think you will, but I think right now, more than it was 5 years ago, it is harder to win a national title than it was 5 years ago. But having said that, there was only a handful of schools that could win the national title, 5+ years ago. Now there's more teams. So it's like the field, all of a sudden, that bet became much more enhanced, I feel.
That also makes this a lot harder. You've brought up, like you said a million times, well, the last 3 coaches all won national championships. But they were competing in almost a completely different sport. And This is a sport now where Indiana can win the national championship. So all those advantages that LSU has had over the years and the money and all of that, right, is not necessarily as big an advantage as it used to be. Nobody necessarily, except maybe Ohio State, has a clear built-in advantage over the others. All right. So most of these questions, again, were about people's opinion, coaches' opinions on coaches who got hired. One of the questions was, who was the most underrated hire of the cycle? The guy that comes up most immediately and most often, it seems like, was Kyle Whittingham at Michigan, which I think speaks to how respected he is in his industry.
Yeah, it does. And I think there was a couple of layers to this. So he got mentioned on about 1/3 of the ballots, which was a sizable number, more than any other coach. It was Kyle Whittingham, then Matt Campbell, then James Franklin at Virginia Tech. I think Whittingham was on 8. I think Campbell was on 6, and Franklin was on 5. I think part of it with Whittingham that adds to it was the fit. And also, look, he's replacing a head coach in Sharon Moore who was in way over his head. There was a lot of dysfunction around the program. And you just feel like Kyle Whittingham, you're not going to be getting that kind of dysfunction, right? And he does seem to fit in terms of what Michigan wants to be, in terms of really physical football, hard running game, just attack people. The teams play hard. So I feel like people all kind of bought into that and said, okay, this is a really good situation and a really good fit. Some of the comments we got on Penn State was Penn State lucked into a really good hire because it took 50 days for them to land on Matt Campbell. But look what Matt Campbell did at Iowa State. That program was nothing until he got there. And then all of a sudden they had a bunch of winning seasons and were, a team that win 8, 9, 10 games. So I think that was another one that coaches really seemed to like.
I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one who thinks Matt Campbell is an underrated hire. On the flip side, you had a question that was basically one they were most surprised by, that you could basically replace the word surprise with disappointed, right? It was the guys they were most underwhelmed with. And Alex Golesh's name came up a lot at Auburn, which I wasn't necessarily expecting.
I wasn't either. This question was one of the more interesting ones to see how it unfolded. So there's a handful of coaches I spoke to, and I think one that Antonio spoke to, who actually just don't like Alex Golesh. They feel like he's arrogant. They feel like he's rubbed people the wrong way. Maybe not rubbed players the wrong way, but rubbed other coaches the wrong way. And I think there was some pushback on that. Look, I thought he did a really good job at USF because they were so bad before they got there, but it had been a good program. Willie Taggart had some success. Obviously, Jim Leavitt had a lot of success building the program. But I think the coaches there were like, when he played other good coaches in the AAC, it wasn't like he was getting the best of them. Now, one guy who also fits in the category, did not like Alex Golesh, was like, you know what? Maybe that's what Auburn needs right now. Like maybe this is a good fit, for where they are, because it felt like they've been spinning their wheels. And it certainly helps that he has a really good quarterback in Byron Brown, and he brought him with him. He has some other really good players that he brought with him. So that was a surprising one.
Real quick, in defense of Golesh,
yes.
One of the guys who said one guy said a Big 12 head coach, I was kind of shocked about it, but then turns around and says, but I think it's good. He'll turn Auburn into Josh Heupel, Tennessee. So like the other guys who said they were surprised, like one guy said, but not in a good way. But that Big 12 head coach was bullish about it.
Yeah, that's true. And again, I think you have to separate, do they like him versus do they think he'd be a good fit? And I think that was noteworthy in that one. The other thing was there was 2 other coaches who I'm not sure a lot of people in the national media or just general football fans have much opinion one way or the other on these 2 guys. But Will Hall, who's the new coach at Tulane, people like him. He did a good job when he was a Division II coach at West Georgia and at West Alabama, but he really bombed at his last head coaching job, Southern Miss. And Will Hall, for people who don't know him, was a terrific small college player. And then his dad is a legendary coach, high school coach in the state of Mississippi. Will Hall really struggled at Southern Miss. And then he was on staff at Tulane under John Sumrall. He ends up getting the job, and people are looking at going, wait a minute, this was a team that just made it to the playoff. And then you hire a guy who won 1 game at Southern Miss. So people took note of that. Coaches took note of that.
That was the most bizarre hire of the whole cycle. And I get that he was already there, but I mean, like you said, he was there, well, not even 3 full seasons. And he went from 7-6 to 3-9. To what ended up being a 1-11 season, though he was fired in the middle of it. So, and there was no kind of rehab tour in between, right? Like
Well, he did. He went to Tulane for a year as the offensive coordinator.
And now he's the head coach of
a better program,
of a much better program, and one that, like you said, was in the playoff just last year.
Yeah,
we shall see how that goes.
Yeah, the other one where there was definitely some pushback on was Iowa State hiring Jimmy Rogers after one season at Washington State. Now, he had success and won a national title at South Dakota State. And then he went to Wazoo, and I think people who were paying attention were like, yeah, he didn't do that great of a job there. He was only there 1 year, and then he bolted, I mean, like really fast. Like as soon as Matt Campbell is getting announced, Jimmy Rogers getting announced, taking over for him in Ames. The coaches I talked to did not think that much of that hire.
I definitely found it not alarming, but something short of that. I mean, basically, Matt Campbell left on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Jamie Pollard had hired Jimmy Rogers. And when you talk to reporters, he basically said like he first met him a couple years ago at one of these mock interview seminars where they help coaches.
It's an agent putting on things to get them to network with ADs.
They stayed in touch ever since. And when the job opened, he called him, right? So it's like kind of really you didn't want to maybe talk to some other people. That being said, Jamie Pollard's last football and men's basketball coaches were A+ slam, wildly successful hires. So I'm going to give him a little benefit of the doubt.
We'll see. I mean, again, this was a guy like he was basically waiting on Matt Campbell to make his announcement. And then he was going to tell, okay, you're going to tell your team. I mean, as somebody who has an affinity for Washington State, the program, I really feel for that program because I was like, I get it. Jake Dicker did a really good job there. He left for Wake Forest. Rogers comes in. He's there for, I don't even know if it was a full year. And then he bails as quick as he can. I get it. It's a better job that he left for. But it's that's the nature of college football right now. It's just there's not a lot,
and Washington State's AD left for their arch rival.
Yeah,
and their last two quarterbacks, Cam Ward goes to Miami, becomes a number one pick, and John Mateer, who was kind of a sensation in his one year there, 1 year as the starter there, leaves for Oklahoma. It's not been fun to be a Cougs fan, to say the least. All right, last one is a more open-ended one, and I give you guys a lot of credit for asking this. Are athletic directors influenced by College Game Day when hiring and firing?
Yeah, this was this was one of the ideas from one of our editors, Matt Brown, who oversaw this package. And so the reaction was pretty strong. I don't think it was shocking that you would hear about like, okay, people are paying attention to what gets said on College Game Day. College Game Day is an institution when it comes to college football. It's on for now 3 hours on Saturday mornings before the games. So the fact that ADs would pay attention now, I will say this. I was surprised how much like almost disdain or disrespect for ADs was coming up in some of the questions, some of the comments of coaches going, these ADs don't really know college football, or they don't really, it's like they are so impacted, not just by what's said on game day, but what's said on anything in the media, right? And I think I'm a little surprised because you and I are both in it and in the media, and we certainly talk a lot on this podcast and different platforms, certainly on social media about different things. And it's surprising to hear how much that they think that can impact the marketplace and what's going on. And I don't know if I don't remember if this made it into the final version of the story, but one of the coaches we spoke to used the example of when Kirk Herbstreit, this is probably 5 years ago, went on game day, spoke into the camera and talked about Miami and like basically, do you want to get in or not? And this coach said, once he did that, Manny Diaz got shoved out the door. And basically it was like, we got to go get Mario. That was the go get Mario message. Now, I don't think, because part of there's another layer of our, another question of ours was like, how much do you think Jimmy Sexton, the big agent at CAA, controls college football? Now, I don't know how much, if at all, there's like cause and effect directly to that. It's not like, I genuinely don't think Kirk Herbstreit was like thinking, oh yeah, Cristobal's agent is going to love this or whatever. By the way,
it was more than just Cristobal. Yeah. It changed the entire administration's approach to football. Like that's when they went on the warpath in terms of going and getting more money, and it's very distracting. and using the like profits from their hospital to help put more money into football. So I do think it's very influential. I thought there was a Big 12 head coach who I thought put it very well. It's not as simple as AD turns on ESPN and says, okay, we should hire this guy. I don't know if it's them, game day specifically, but the media controls the narrative. The narrative gets heard by the donors, and the donors affect the ADs. So it may not be direct, but through influence, 100%, those huge voices have an effect. And I think that's right. You're not operating in a vacuum. You have a lot of constituents, donors, telling you, go get this guy, go get this guy. It's kind of like how I always say this about the NFL draft. When you see like the fans of a team, they don't like the pick and they boo because it's entirely because that guy was it's not that they like have watched that guy's tape and, it's that he went higher than the mock drafts had him. So, as you know, like the GMs have their own boards but like the media told you that this guy was going to go in the late first round of the mock drafts. Your team took him 15th. Boo, bad pick. And I think there's probably, that's probably this version of it. All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, mailbag time.
And welcome back to The Audible. As always, send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Stu, the first question is near and dear to both our hearts because it's a West Coast related question. This is from Vinny in Wisconsin. We are 2 full seasons into the new look Big Ten and SEC, and while Texas and Oklahoma seem to have fully integrated into the SEC, it seems like the fan bases of the original Big Ten schools will never really accept the West Coast teams as one of their own. Oregon and USC's flash is the complete opposite of everything that Big Ten football is about. UCLA's fan base is an embarrassment to a conference trying to show they care just as much as the SEC does, and Washington is just kind of there. Do you agree that the West Coast schools are not being accepted? Will they ever? Most importantly, is there a way to undo this and turn the Big Ten back into a Midwest football conference? Again, this is from Vinny in Wisconsin. Stu, what do you think?
I mean, I think the main reason it feels that way is because Oklahoma and Texas were not so far away from the other schools, right? Same time zone. We already had a school in Texas there. Oklahoma's like they were able to do it in a way that the conference remained, even though it's a wider footprint, connected to the footprint. It is and will always be totally bizarre that you have 2 schools in Los Angeles and in Oregon and Washington in a conference where all the other schools are at least 2 time zones away, and some of them are complete on the other side of the country. And he says, will the Big Ten fans accept them? You tell me, I don't think those West Coast, except for maybe Oregon, because they're dominating, but that they've accepted being in the Big Ten. I mean, if you were to, I know why they did it. The Pac-12 was, fading away and the money and all that. But like, if you gave them truth serum, I'm sure the USC fans, especially the UCLA fans, say, no, we'd rather be playing West Coast schools than playing Illinois, Purdue, Iowa. It's just awkward.
Stu, I think the other big point of this is just there's way more history tied to the old Pac-10, old Pac-12. Those are going back not just like a decade or two when it was Texas and Oklahoma were in the Big 12. Before that, one was in the Southwest Conference. The other one was the Big 8. But it was like it was just different tie-ins here. I think it's more than that. There's so much of the identity is like these are Pac-12 schools. I don't know if you get this, like you're in Northern California, I'm in Southern California, but people out here, it's not just, the Pac-12, whether you want to joke about conference or champions, but there is something that tied to the identity of being Pac-12 schools. Now, I don't know necessarily if most out here think, oh yeah, Washington State and Oregon State are as much part of the fabric as like UCLA and Cal and USC and Stanford and Washington. And, it's just, there is a longer history here as it ties into West Coast is very different. It's just geographically very different. Ideologically, it feels like it's still pretty different, in part because it's like there's a lot of beaches out here and there's just sort of like it's a different geography and different mentality to some degree. And I think that all fits in. Now, if if Oregon or USC wins a national title, and then all of a sudden these Big Ten schools, because I don't know how they don't have the same level of conference pride and loyalty that you get with the SEC. And this is a much deeper question about like how you hear the SEC chant, because I feel like it's not just related to sports that pulls together people in the SEC. Whereas, in the Big Ten, yeah, I'm sure there's pride that they can say, you know what, we've toppled the SEC from the dominance, but it's not this, they don't look at it the same way. And I don't think that's certainly the case of the California schools, but I think it's as much the case of teams interlocked in that Midwestern footprint. So I think there's a lot of layers to this. Can we undo it? I don't think we're undoing it, right? There's too much that's gone on with these TV contracts and how it's played out. Obviously, USC was driving that. Obviously, the TV networks were driving that. I'm interested to see if they will have a little more cohesiveness with it. They have these conference meetings, and we talked about this, I remember last year around this time, coming out of the conference meetings, they just view things differently in how the SEC's run compared to how the Big Ten has pretty much always been run, and certainly under Tony Petitti. And I feel like that also factors into it.
I mean, the Big Ten at this point is basically a TV package. It's not a conference. And the SEC, you could say, is getting to that point. And so I don't think there's any undoing it in football. I think that ship has sailed. And just in general, like I think football conferences are not, you have to kind of get out of your mind the traditional notion of them being conferences. They are media rights packages. I actually think it is doable in the other sports, and in fact, probably more necessary, because at the end of the day, the football school, in football, USC's making 2 or 3 trips east, and they're short trips, and like it's just not the end of the world. But in basketball, I mean, you know what? It's actually, Bruce, very timely. Have you been watching any of these conference tournaments? Like, I turned on the TV on Tuesday, and in the ACC tournament in Charlotte, Syracuse was playing SMU. Syracuse was playing SMU. Stanford was playing Pitt.
I watched that game. Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's even more, at least the men's basketball teams are probably all flying charters to these tournaments. And some of the other sports, like I know.
The ACC is the worst example of this because you stuck Cal and Stanford in there. There's no geographic, and now also you have Miami and Florida State in the same league. You cannot get further apart unless you stuck Washington and Washington State in there.
And a lot of those non-revenue teams, like those kids are getting on a Southwest flight to get out there. So I think almost from a humane perspective, they need to unwind that. And I don't see why they couldn't, because those media rights that everybody's fighting over are predominantly based on football. I don't see why you couldn't say, we're gonna form a West, whether it's geographic like their own conferences or geographic associations or whatever it may be, and we're going to get those to being more geographically sensible. Or maybe it's just for the non-revenue sports. Like there is money in men's basketball and to some extent women's basketball. So, but it just stop doing this. Stop sending volleyball teams across the country for 2-3 weeks at a time. All right, let me cue you up here. From Andrew Newhouser in Akron, following up on Ralph's column last week where he tried to guess who the coach will be at every school in 2030. Along those lines, which current Power 4 coach do each of you think will be at his current school the longest? What do you say?
I had 2 thoughts that came to mind after I went through this. One was Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, obviously at his alma mater, felt like he had a chance to maybe leave for a Big Ten program, whether it was Michigan or how real that was. Opted to stay even without great resources at his alma mater. He's done a really good job in 3 seasons, but he's a really good offensive coach. And part of me thinks, he could be very marketable, potentially as an NFL job down the road. And I feel like that as much as I think he'll be there for a while, the guy I think will be there longer, another alma mater guy who had a really, really good year is Clark Lee at Vanderbilt. I know there's some thought at some point if Marcus Freeman leaves, maybe Clark Lee will be in play. I don't know if Clark Lee is going to win enough to be able to get the Notre Dame job. He had a phenomenal season last year, winning 10 games with Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers. I don't want to say that was exactly getting lightning in a bottle, but I felt like that was a little of that. And I think he will have Vandy be good. I don't know if Vandy can get to be great again. Maybe. I mean, they got a 5-star quarterback in Jared Curtis, but we'll see. My sense is, if you ask me who will be there the longest at their current spot, I'm gonna bet on Clark Lee. Who would you say?
I'm gonna go Kirby Smart, and not necessarily so much because he played there, but because where do you go from Georgia?
You
pretty
retire.
much just.
You
don't. There's not some other job unless he really wants to be an NFL head coach, and I haven't gotten the sense he does. And he also doesn't strike me as the type who would, what we're seeing from some of the older coaches right now, saying like, I've had enough. I don't want to deal with this stuff anymore. Like Kirby is so maniacal. He'll just say, "Tell me what the rules are, and I'm going to go dominate you in them." So
Kirby's
he's only
like
50.
early 50s, right? Yeah,
he's 50.
50. I would be surprised if he's there for another 8 years. I just think after a while, you start dealing with, like we said earlier, you're dealing with a sport was way positioned better for him 3 or 4 years ago when they were, had won back-to-back national titles. The SEC has gotten a little deeper, more competitive because it's more balanced. And every year it feels like he's dealing with off-season issues of his players can't not drive 90 miles an hour excessive or whatever. Like that's a constant. I just feel like there's going to be so many headaches. He doesn't strike me as a guy who wants to go be Nick Saban and go on a TV set, every weekend. But I mean, how long do you want to keep grinding?
All right. So. You said he's not going to make it past 8 years, right? That's what you just said?
Yeah.
All right.
I don't think. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, at age 58, what's he going to go do?
He's going to have made a fortune. He already has. I think he'll just
go.
But
these guys don't, to the most part, like that's not what drives them. Like they're obsessed with football and they want to win. And like,
I think he'll go watch his kids. I think he'll go watch his kids play college sports. Do what Will Muschamp.
Well, that would have to be even sooner, right?
I think he's got. Yeah, doesn't he? I feel like he has one who's around my kid's age. So I don't know. Again, this isn't like I've mapped out his future, but I just feel like this is such a grind, especially the way they do it, especially the way he does it. I just don't know how long you can keep doing that. My buddy Chris Peterson, he walked away around that age. Bob Stoops walked away at an earlier age. Urban Meyer, who's as maniacal as anybody I've come across in college football, he's not a college coach anymore. So, and he's not like, he's 62.
Yeah, so maybe you're right. Maybe Kirby will be on the SEC network. I don't know. Like Jimbo's on the ACC network.
I don't think he needs to do that. He doesn't strike me as a guy who wants to do that. I'm sure he'll be able to play a lot of golf or pickleball or whatever he's doing at that point.
I just don't see that. Now, look, Kenny Dillingham, the biggest reason to say him is he's so young, right? He could be if he wants to be, he could be a college football coach for the next 30 years. But my reason I didn't say him is I just think as long as you're in the Big 12 and not the Big 10 or SEC, even if it is your alma mater, there's going to be temptations at some point, if he keeps winning, to if Ryan Day went to the NFL and they called Kenny Dillingham, he's going to turn down Ohio State? Probably not. So
one other name that I thought of, and I was like, the age isn't, but it's like, I'm not sure I could see this person doing another job. And this person doesn't golf. And this person doesn't have like other hobbies like this. And this Mario Cristobal, who's also at his alma mater. He's a little older than Kirby, not much, but he is like a maniac when it comes to recruiting and all of this stuff. And like, I don't see him as a hobbies guy of like, hey, we're going to take the family and go skiing or go water skiing, or I'm going to go I'm going to go play 72 holes in the next 2 days. That's not him either. So
it's interesting that between us, everybody we've named is at their alma mater, and they're not even the only ones. Like, it just seems like that's Jeff Brom. Like, there's so many now that are in that category. Now, all of this is contingent on they continue to win. Like, if Mario Cristobal, after the national championship, goes 7-6, 5-7, 8, he's not going to be the coach for 4 years, much less 20.
He will. If he goes 7-6, he got them into the national title game.
No,
Also,
I mean, if he did it over, if that became the norm again.
I think with the way these schools, some of these programs, and again, Dillingham's at a different place, but I think the way that Miami is committed, the way Georgia's committed, even now the way that Vandy is committed, I think that tips the scale, especially, Miami's in the ACC. They're not in the SEC. Their resources compared to the rest of the ACC and their commitment and obviously their recruiting base. I mean, he doesn't have the Boston College recruiting footprint or the Duke recruiting footprint. He's got the Miami recruiting footprint. So it's just, again, those are my three guesses, I would say, on this.
All right. And we're going to wrap it up with another coaching question from Matt, who says, big fan of the show. It's my favorite podcast. That's great. Thank you, Matt. Over the past 20 years, what were your highest convictions of coaching hires at the time the hire was announced? I'm guessing Urban Meyer at Ohio State would be close to the top of that list. What percentage of those hires worked out?
Yes, Urban Meyer would be high at that list. Mario Cristobal, to be honest, I remember went back and found the story I did the day when I talked to him when he was taking the Miami job, would have been high on the list. I tend to go, Stu, with the ones that I felt like I got way wrong. So I'm going to own that, Scott Frost, we've talked about this a bunch, got that horribly wrong. That one for sure, I feel like was a bad one. I'm thinking about like the one, look, I felt good about John Sumrall going to Troy. I thought knowing him and feeling like, oh, this guy's going to crush it as a head coach. I felt good about that. I didn't think, this jury's still out on this. I thought Luke Fickell would have done quite a bit better at Wisconsin because he did really well, obviously at Cincinnati, and then he's a Big Ten guy. I would have thought that one would have been considerably better.
I thought Tom Herman was going to kill it at Texas because he was riding high at that time. I mean, in terms of a successful one, I was 100% sure Urban Meyer was going to win big at Ohio State, and I felt just as confident at the time Jim Harbaugh would do that at Michigan. Took him a little bit, but he eventually delivered. The
coaching hire that was made that you were like, okay, as you were talking about with Will Hall now at Tulane, maybe on a bigger scale, was there one you're like, ooh, this is not going to work out?
There was a bunch of them.
Let's take Belichick out.
My hit rate on those is much higher than my hit rate. Like I said this with the coaching grades. Like my hit rate and it's not that often that I give somebody a D or an F, is much higher than when I give somebody an A. Charlie Weiss at Kansas was so obviously a terrible idea. Les Miles at Kansas was so obviously a terrible idea, though not everybody agreed with me at the time. Trent Dilfer, when UAB hired him, I all these guys that were like so unqualified or past their prime, Belichick obviously falls into that category. I'm sure there have been guys that I gave a terrible grade to that did well. I just can't remember them off the top of my head. Now you're making me wonder what I gave Will Hall.
At Southern Miss or at Tulane?
Well, my hit rate that does not give Will Hall very good odds because I did give Tulane a D+ for that one.
What are you doing? Who's giving a D+? What kind of teacher does that? Just give it a D.
I gave a D. It did have a D, and that was UAB. Like, okay, the Trent Dilfer thing was a debacle. We can all agree on that. And so you're just going to promote his offensive coordinator? I don't really necessarily have anything against Alex Mortensen. I just thought that was bizarre.
At least on the bright side, he led them to a win over Memphis. I think it was.
And then he lost to UConn and Rice.
Yeah. Well, look, both of those teams were better than them. The fact that he won one of those games against the team that was like the head coaches at Arkansas now.
Oh, I'll give you an all-time bomb of a pick by mine. It was another Kansas coach, but in the opposite direction. Turner Gill, I'm pretty sure was an A or an A-.
He did really well at Buffalo.
That did not last long.
He did not do well at Kansas.
Right. So who's getting our gift card here, Bruce? Let me specify for those who aren't familiar with this segment. The person whose question we like the best gets a $16 Trader Joe's gift card. Well, let me just give you mine, and that's Andrew Newhouser in Akron. I thought we had a nice, fun conversation about which coach will be at their school the longest.
I will agree with you. Andrew, you get the congrats on the Trader Joe's gift card. I am going to give you you and every of our listeners, and you, Stu, and you, Matt. I'm not a big snacks guy. I mean, I snack from time to time, but it's not like I'm looking for it in the house. But the other day I was very hungry, and apparently my wife bought these, and I will show you what it is, and I will tell you.
I've had those. I've definitely had those.
So these are the Trader Joe's dark chocolate bark with almond, pretzel, and sea salt. I was like shocked how tasty these were. Now, look, I'll admit, like there's two things that if they're in something, I will probably like it. Sea salt is one, and goat cheese is the other. Now, I wouldn't want goat cheese in these, but it's like
that is not where I was expecting you to go.
No,
I thought you were going to say chocolate.
No,
goat cheese.
Goat cheese, yeah. I like it on salads, but like sea salt, big fan, and these are great. So if you haven't tried them, go try them. It's one of my favorite things that Trader Joe's has, and I just discovered them in the pantry like 2 weeks ago.
As somebody who is lactose intolerant, I always love any kind of dessert that's dark chocolate because I can have that. And I have had that one. It's really good. So I can't remember if I already said this, but Andrew should send your email. You should send your mailing address to the audiblepod@gmail.com. And everybody else should ask your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com. Ralph will be back next week, and it's going to be, I think, a spicy episode, Bruce, because it's going to be the annual episode where Ralph plays judge on our top 25 coach rankings.
Can't wait.
See you then.